Health Alert is brought to you by OU Physicians in Tulsa. Hello, welcome to Health Alert. I'm Pam Butler. Today we're going to talk about grandparenting issues, and joining me is Pam Rask, a grandparent. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Now I want to start with our viewers by talking about grandparenting as a phenomenon in this country, and then we'll talk about it in relation to Oklahoma. Overall, in terms of nationwide, has the phenomenon of grandparenting in terms of raising grandchildren increased?
Yes, it has increased. Particularly here in Oklahoma, we have about 78,000 children who are living under the age of 18 that are living with their grandchildren. And out of those 78,000, there's approximately 44,000 of those grandparents that are actually raising their grandchildren. And then there'll be about 30% that actually raise their grandchildren for 5 years or more.
Okay, and I think even with the national statistics, it's risen from about 1970 being around 2.2 million to in 2000 up to 4 million. So
yes,
it is a growing phenomenon.
It is a growing phenomenon, and I think we're going to see it even more increasing as we move through these tough economic times.
Okay, now when we think about that, you talked about then economics as being a big impactor. Are we finding that maybe children, if they're having children younger, as younger teens, they're needing that support where the grandparent steps in because maybe the parent is not available, or does that factor in any kind of way?
There is. Some of that does factor in when there are younger teens who are having kids at younger age. They're not quite prepared for parenting. They're still moving through trying to find themselves. Mm-hmm. And moving through that process of becoming an adult and making adult decisions. And there are some that do. They take their kids and they raise them. And then there are some families that have their parents who become incarcerated, and then it becomes necessary for the grandparent to intervene, which was in my case, that I had to intervene and take guardianship of my grandchildren.
Okay, now you talked about that too, because sometimes people will wonder, well, the grandparent sort of should be the person of last resort, is what we think, mm-hmm. because you've got, the parent there. Mm-hmm. So if there's not issues of, say, incarceration, and you talked about economics being another issue, what can be some other things that are affecting that parent's ability to retain custody and parenting of that child?
I just think inability to actually provide them. I think that the work hours, sometimes are difficult for parents. It may be a better fit for them to live with the grandparents because the parent has to work late hours in the evening, or they may not be able to have housing. There may not be housing for that parent. I know that there are a lot of resources available for parents, but sometimes it's difficult to get housing or to get jobs, and that also to let you take off with your child, to go to doctor's appointments, to take care of school functions, and so sometimes that's why grandparents end up with their children, and the parent just may not be ready to take on the sole responsibility of providing for that child.
Okay, now when that tends to happen, do you find that the parent is also moving in with their parent, who is the grandparent of their children? Is that kind of common?
That does happen. That does happen. Sometimes the children, but other times there are some difficulties with the child living, and the child wants to live on their own. Mm-hmm. The young adult wants to live on their own, but they can't afford, or they can't take care of the child financially, so it just stays with the grandparent. In the court system, there are some standards that children, once you get legal guardianship of the child, there are standards that parents are supposed to meet before they're able to get their children back, before they're able to before they are able to terminate the guardianship. Some of the standards are they have to have independent housing, They have to have independent housing where the children can come back and live with them. They have to be drug-free. They have to have their own car, and they have to have insurance on that vehicle. Sometimes they have to go through parenting classes because there may be an issue of the parent not being able to function appropriately as a parent. Maybe some anger management issues, so they require them to, maybe there's some domestic violence that's happening between parents, and so the child needs to be removed from those parents, so they may require them to go and have a domestic violence assessment. Or go through some parenting pieces, such as a program like parent-child interaction therapy if you're having behavioral issues with a child.
Okay, now let me ask you this, okay, because so those are some of the criteria to get the child back. But let's say, and you can talk about your experiences as much as you're comfortable with, in terms of getting the children initially. Okay, there are issues of safety or other kinds of concerns or just being in a healthy environment for the child. What kinds of steps did you have to go through in order to get the legal guardianship of your child? If, for instance, I'm not sure if your child was willing to give you that, but what were the steps that you would need to go through?
Well, you have to go to the courthouse, and you have to file guardianship papers. It's always helpful if you have an attorney, if you're represented by an attorney. There are some places that people can go to get assistance, like through legal aid. And there are some resources available to parents who may not be able to afford it. You might be able to find some resources through the Department of Human Services, but it is helpful to have an attorney that represents you, especially if the guardianship is contested. Now, with my particular guardianship, my daughter was very young, and she became incarcerated, so I did go and I got guardianship of my granddaughter. And my grandson, my daughter just gave my grandson to me. She was not able to take care of him, and she was just going through some really tough times with her mental illness, her bipolar, so she really needed me to intervene and take both of the kids. So I've had my granddaughter now I've had her since she was a little over 2 years old, so she's 8 now, so going on 6 years. And I've had my grandson since he was 7 months old, and he'll be 3 on Monday. So it's very, so I've had both of these children for quite a while. And they've really become an integral part of our family unit.
Okay. Now what I want to do, Pam, I'm going to take a really quick break, but I want to come back then and pick up on that point and really kind of talk about once the grandchildren are within the home and they are an integral part of your family, how or do you separate parenting and grandparenting? Because you're playing 2 different roles. Okay, so we'll pick up on that point.
Okay.
Please stay with us. We'll be right back.